I am so excited about today's episode. Today we're talking about binge eating. This is something that so many of the women in my community struggle with. This is one of the biggest things that we address in Food Freedom Academy. So if you are someone who you can eat well all day long, but nighttime is your weakness and you feel like all of your willpower goes out the window and you binge on everything in your kitchen pantry, if you feel frantic, chaotic, and out of control around off-limit foods, things like candy, ice cream, cookies, or once you start eating one thing, you cave into your cravings and have chocolate, it like triggers this frenzy of one food leads to another. So you start with cookies and then you gotta have chips and then you gotta have ice cream and it's never ending. If even when you feel physically full and even sometimes so stuffed it hurts, you still want more food and you don't know why, you just can't stop eating when you're full like everyone else, then there's a good chance that you're doing one of these things to try to solve it. You're trying to keep junk food out of the house or having rules around when it's okay to eat. So perhaps after 8 p.m., we stop eating, we get out of the kitchen, we try to brush our teeth and go for a walk or drink tea to distract ourselves. You might also try to limit certain foods. So have rules around when you can or can't eat sweets, for example. I can only eat sweets on the weekend or on special occasions. You might also be counting calories or measuring and tracking your food to try to bring more awareness to your eating habits. So if that's you, then there's a good chance that you have been struggling with binge eating for a little while now and it's not going away. And if anything, it's getting worse. And what most people don't understand is that these very things that diet culture or social media tells you to do, like have more willpower and add more rules about eating and structure and restrictions, they're the things that are making these binges worse. And so today, who we have on the show is a very special guest. I had an absolute blast talking to her. We are talking to integrated and functional registered dietitian, Michelle Shapiro. She is also the host of the Quiet the Diet podcast. She is so knowledgeable, so insightful. We talked about binging in a way that I have no doubt you have never heard before. Your entire perspective on what causes binge eating and understanding how to overcome and put binge eating behind you once and for all is going to be shifted in today's episode. And if you can relate to what I just described as feeling out of control around food, if you want to be able to keep food in the house without being afraid of losing control, if you want to remove the guilt and the anxiety and rediscover the pleasure of eating, if you want to feel confident in your body and your food choices and stop yo-yo dieting, and if you want to achieve a sustainable and balanced health without giving up the things that you love, then I am so thrilled to announce that the 7-day Intuitive Eating Challenge, a week-long event where you will get to learn all of the skills and the tools and the strategies that I share with my own clients to help you get started on your intuitive eating journey. It's back, baby. And so this is starting on April 20th. Registration is starting today. So today is the first day that you can start registering. It is absolutely free. All you need to do is invest your time. There's going to be 3 separate live trainings. There's a private community on Facebook where you are going to meet other women who are on the exact same journey as you. I'm going to be in there giving these trainings, answering your questions, doing hot seat coaching calls. I mean, it is such a fun experience and you have nothing to lose and everything to gain. And so if you even have an inkling that you want to heal your relationship with food, you are done dieting, then this is the place to be. So to sign up for the challenge, head to sabrinamagnon.com/challenge, or you can go to the link in my show notes where you will find that link to sign up. It doesn't matter if you are absolutely a newbie to intuitive eating, you've never heard the term before, or you've been working on intuitive eating, maybe you know a little bit, but you want to learn more, no matter where you're at in your intuitive eating journey, this challenge is going to be so valuable for you. So head to the link in my show notes to sign up for the challenge. And now I will stop chatting up a storm and bring on our guest, Michelle Shapiro. Enjoy our amazing conversation. Well, first of all, thank you, Michelle, for being on the show. And can you introduce yourself, who you are, and what do you do?
Absolutely. So my name is Michelle Shapiro. I'm an integrative and functional registered dietitian, born and raised New Yorker. I help clients with 3 specific conditions, either the holistic reversal of anxiety, gut issues, or to approach weight lovingly in a body neutral way.
I love that so much. And I love looking at that functional approach. And I know that a lot of people don't actually know what that means to look at it through a functional lens. And I actually got into health coaching because of functional health. And I thought that it's so important to look at that from the root cause of it all. So for anyone who doesn't know what functional nutrition really is, can you explain that to them?
I'd love to. And I can do it kind of through the lens of functional medicine and functional nutrition, which some people are more familiar with that functional medicine term. So let's say you have a thyroid condition and you go to a conventional medicine doctor. They might give you, let's say for hypothyroidism, they will give you a pill that is an exogenous thyroid hormone from a pig and say, take this. This will replace the thyroid hormone. If you're talking about functional medicine or nutrition, we like to approach things from what we call a root cause perspective. So we want to know why. So my question would be, why is your thyroid not functioning properly? And then we would work to make sure that the person's own body is able to start functioning properly again. So we want to know why something's gone wrong in the body. And then we work not only to treat symptoms, but to fix it at the root.
Yeah. And I think that this is the kind of approach that you need to approach everything with. Because I know for me, my clients are chronic binge eaters and emotional eaters. And what most people do when they're struggling with the symptoms is okay, how do I fix this, right? I'll just add more rules into what I can't or can't eat, or I'll keep junk food out of the house. And we focus on that instead of asking ourselves the important question, which is, why does this keep happening?
Totally. That's a really good way of phrasing it too. And certainly in the case of binge eating specifically, which I know we're going to talk about today, it's generally rooted from some sort of emotional or physical dysregulation. So, binge eating is a perfect fix for that. And it's a really effective one. So I know you work with your clients a lot on this too, but instead of kind of viewing the conditions as shameful, we like to view them as opportunities to dig deeper and understand what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And the same thing for emotional eating. A lot of the times we look for that pleasure, we look for that dopamine because we're lacking that in other areas of our life and a lack of balance in our lives. And so looking at, again, because what most people do is they'll carry around the shame and the guilt and the self-blame, and they kind of slap a Band-Aid and think, I just must be lacking willpower and discipline, instead of trying to dive deeper into what's happening.
Yeah. And I think just right off the bat, having people just say, I'm very smart for binge eating, because I think binge eating is a very smart, evolutionarily satisfactory mechanism for regulating our physical or emotional self. So I think that binge eating makes sense. It's a good thing and I understand it. And if it's a habit someone wants to change, I also totally understand that too. But I think just even taking the shame out of it and using it as a call to action inside the body is transformative right there. Like that changes the whole binge for people.
Absolutely. And I had a couple of questions I wanted to ask, but right now I would love for anyone who just heard that binge eating can actually be good. And it means that you're just really smart. Anyone who's understanding that has probably never thought of binge eating that way. So I would love for you to just explain that a little bit more. Why is binge eating a smart response for your body?
Absolutely. Yeah. So a lot of times when we're called to binge eating, I like to say there's kind of these different voices that are happening in our head all the time. And what most binge eaters normally hear is that last voice, which is the screw it voice, right? Like, screw it. I can't deal with this anymore. I'm not doing this. What we want to hone in on with binge eating is all the voices that happened before. So when we think of binge eating, we think of it as being this sabotaging mechanism. We think it's like, oh, that's so me. I'm sabotaging myself. There's no one on earth who does things to sabotage themselves. We are doing things to help ourselves. What's normally happening before we get to that screw it moment is a lot of chitter chatter. It might go something like this. I'm feeling a little dysregulated. I'm feeling a little upset. I kind of want to eat something. And then another voice comes out and says, you better not eat that. You better not eat that. Then the voice comes back and says, oh, but it might make me feel better. And then it gets so exhausting that our brain goes, I know what to do. I'm going to squash this argument. And I'm also going to make myself physically feel better because these foods are going to release a lot of positive chemicals to alternate what's going on inside of us. Let me squash this right now. So then you binge eat. And that actually is extremely regulating for your nervous system for more than one reason, not just the chemicals we produce, in addition to the chemicals we produce, but because your body called for your attention and said, please save me. And you answered the call. And so that is why it's so protective and safe to binge eat and why we keep doing it, even though we feel like it's bad for us, or even when sometimes it does cause us health issues down the line.
Yeah, it's like that temporary release before we feel all the side effects of the physical discomfort and the guilt and the shame. There is that moment where your body feels like it got what it wanted.
Absolutely. And it's like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for listening to me. That's how our bodies feel. Our nervous systems, which we can talk about a little bit more in depth, like our parasympathetic versus our sympathetic nervous systems, but they only really learn by example. And what I mean by that is if you feel unsafe, which is usually the place people are in before they binge, whether it be feeling threatened physically, emotionally, whatever way we feel unsafe. Again, if you're feeling that way, your nervous system wants to learn how to feel safe. So your body goes, I have a fix. You give your body the fix. And now your nervous system learned when I feel bad, there's a way to not feel bad. Mm-hmm. Here's the way to not feel bad. So the issue is what I think a lot of people try to do with binge eating, just like you said, Sabrina, is they say, I'm going to cut this off. What's your nervous system going to learn from that? Your nervous system's going to learn that it's freaking out and needs your help and that you're going to say, stop it, cut it out. That's not safe for your nervous system. So that's why oftentimes when I'm working with people with binge eating as well, we're not kind of just like stopping the binging. I actually tell my clients at the beginning to binge more so that we can learn more about why it's working for them in the first place, because it is in some level working for everyone. They wouldn't do it again if it wasn't working, obviously.
Yeah. And I say the same thing to my clients. When we start working together, they'll notice that maybe for the couple of the first few weeks, they're still having some overeating and some binge eating. And they thought that it would just stop overnight. And I always look at them when they come on a coaching call and they tell me like, last night I binged, I'm like, awesome. How can we analyze this? How can we learn from this instead of looking at every roadblock or every mistake as some indication that you're failing? How can you use every experience to learn about yourself? Like I teach intuitive eating, and every step is about learning about yourself and your triggers and why you do what you do.
Absolutely. I love that you flip that for clients. You turn what feels like a failure into such a win for them. Mm-hmm. I think that's really powerful. And it certainly helps people. And I'm sure you get this all the time, Sabrina, but your clients probably feel like, wow, I can tell Sabrina anything and I'm not going to feel judged. And that's a really safe place for healing because, again, remember, our nervous system learns by example. So anytime someone comes into your office and says, Sabrina, I feel this way, and you respond by making them feel better by accepting them, that also creates healing in and of itself. So just the act of non-judgment is physically healing for people. And that's really, I guess, one tip I would have for people when they're dealing with binge eating is give yourself that grace and just say, let me understand why I'm doing this instead of judging why I'm doing this. Let's poke around a little bit and then say, oh, I feel bad that my body felt so dysregulated that it needed a big piece of support. Feel that empathy for yourself too. Like you do for your clients.
Yeah. And I think it's really hard because I've been there, and I know from your story that you've also had like very rapid weight loss, and I struggled with binge eating and orthorexia. And I know that when you're in that mindset, and especially because I work with chronic dieters, they don't need to think more negatively. Their brain is wired that way. Their brain is wired to look for the failures. And the more that you look for those things, the more that you bring attention to your weakness, the more weaknesses you're going to find, and the more situations in your life you're going to produce to reinforce the belief that you're a failure. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. And there's two edges to that exact sword you're talking about, which is that also our bodies are always trying to communicate with us. And I always give the example that like our thoughts are like little children, and the more we try to ignore them, kind of the more that they yell at us. Mm-hmm. So when your body is desperately trying to tell you something and you keep trying to suppress it, it's actually going to scream louder and louder. So again, the more that your body says, I really need this help, I really need to feel more comfortable. And the more we say, no, diet more, binge less, the more that is going to catch up with us. And then that's when we start to actually not have conscious control over our actions, which is what we really want, obviously.
Yeah. So if you're talking to someone who is, I'm trying to put myself in someone who's listening to this right now, who is chronically binging and they're doing what we've described, which is I'm just going to keep food out of the house and I'm just going to stop the binge. And there's also like, I'm all about compassion, but I find that another mistake that people make is after a binge is they'll do compassion the wrong way. And they'll be like, tomorrow's a new day, right? Like I'll just forget about it and tomorrow's a new day and I'll leave it behind. And I think that right there, you're missing a really key piece, which is reflecting on what happened and how you can learn from that.
Sabrina, you're on one in a good way. Like that, you're absolutely right. And so I always talk about this in my practice and in my social media presence. I talk about the difference between compassion and coddling. And when you are doing something that's not serving you and you're not sure why you're doing it, again, and the way I know the difference between compassion and coddling is my voices. I'm a New Yorker. I know the way that I talk is very specific. So if I hear a voice, it's like, it's okay that you binged, Michelle. Everything's perfect. Mm-hmm. I'm like, who's that? Like, that's not me. Versus I would say, whoa, that was a heavy night. Like, let's unpack that together. Like that was a lot. Like we need to talk about what just happened together. I want to help you. Mm-hmm. Like there's a big difference between showing up for yourself and trying to kind of sweep under the rug what's going on. And the key word you used was reflection. Mm-hmm. That's how we get curious about what's going on. So I ask people to do things like just tracking kind of what they're feeling before, during, and after a binge. And really the first step is just notice. Totally, I call it conscious observer. You're just noticing what you're feeling. And when you start to kind of notice what happens before a binge, you'll actually start to notice, and I really suggest people do this from a physical plane, what's going on inside of your body before a binge. Is your stomach tightening and you're uncomfortable? Are you feeling anxiety in your shoulders? What's going on the physical plane that you're missing maybe? And where can we bring more attention to it? Not reacting, not trying to provide a solution. And that coddling example you gave, just listening and noticing.
And I think that a lot of people have a hard time. I completely agree. Like that is exactly the process that I take my clients through. And I actually have like a post binge checklist to look at, okay, it has happened. At this point, it's happened. How can we look back on, okay, what happened this morning? What happened at lunch? Who are the people that you saw? What are the experiences that you had? And what people have a hard time with is that conscious observing from a neutral standpoint.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It is so hard because there's so much judgment and guilt involved. And the way that I ask my clients to do it is like, put on a scientist hat as if you're collecting data. Like, how would you look at this through research instead of through bringing all of your baggage and all of the shame that you're carrying around from years and years of struggling with this? Disconnect yourself from that and let's just look at the data, because that's when you start creating solutions for it.
You're 100% right. And it's also the same thing as like if someone's using the scale or not, right? I think of all data, all tools as being either weaponizable, I don't know if it's a word, but or like neutral, like you said, and usable, right? So I think of the example of, a knife, let's say. If you took nutritional science, let's say, if you learned something about calories, if someone has an eating disorder, they could use that knife, that information as a tool to harm themselves, versus if we use the knife for cutting food and all these things that we need it for. Mm-hmm. So it really depends on how our body's receiving the data and how we're reacting to it. So be really conscious about your conscious observing, like you're saying, and try to, whenever possible, be as neutral as possible. If you notice a lot of those other voices coming up, identify those too. So if there's a voice that's like, I can't believe you binged. How could you do this to me? Acknowledge that voice. That's actually a different voice. And then you can kind of put them into buckets and see who goes where.
Mm-hmm. I actually love that you said that. And as you were talking about, there's some tactics like weighing and calorie counting that could be good and not so great for others. And I think that a big problem that people have when it comes to especially nutrition and weight loss and fitness is they don't know what their starting point is. Like they don't know where they should place their focus. And so when they hear things like food freedom or they hear things like calorie counting, they don't know what place they're coming from. And for me, like I struggled with orthorexia and now I am health conscious in a way that like I eat in a way that feels good for my body. And I know that you posted something on Instagram about this too. It's like it all comes down to the intention behind it. And so for someone, and I work again with chronic dieters, for someone who has a history of food shame and of guilt and obsession, then going towards the calorie counting, going towards the obsessive and compulsive weighing yourself, if you don't know where you're starting from and there's that lack of awareness, then you're going to start doing things that might be successful for other people, but are actually going to dig a deeper hole for you.
Yeah, I think it's the tool is much less important, like you're saying, than the intention, because it's any tool is probably usable for you at the right time. So I think what people can actually do is just kind of like pitch to yourself, like, all right, calorie counting, close my eyes. How does calorie counting make me feel? Where do I feel it in my body? Bringing everything back to the somatic experience of being alive. Notice how your body reacts to things. Like I'll do like a game with myself where I'm like, all right, let's go low carb and see if it's going to work this time. And like, I'm like, all right, just do it, whatever, because you know what's going to happen. Like I always end up having poor sleep. I'm a person who needs a moderate carb diet. I never do well on a low carb diet. I'm like very tall. It just doesn't work out for me. Other people, it does.
I feel like I'm talking to my soul sister right now.
I know. I feel very connected to you. I actually very much agree. And I will, but I'll say, you know what, Michelle, go right ahead, sister. You know, go ahead and do your low carb diet. And then within 2 days, I'm like, oh, we're up at 2 a.m. and I'm talking to myself. I'm like, how's it working out? It's not working out. Like, give yourself freedom to experiment, but also give yourself freedom to know when to call it and know it's not the right thing. And just notice how these different kind of modalities interact with your body. I think that's really important.
Yeah. And I love that you said that because, you know, when I was first starting to heal my relationship with food, I couldn't look at food labels because again, that gave me anxiety, that made my heart rush, that gave me a knot in my stomach. I could never possibly count calories. And there is that process of now when I think about weighing myself, that doesn't feel good. I know in my body that doesn't feel good. And I know that if I can go the next 30 years without weighing myself, I will be perfectly happy. Absolutely. But when it comes to seeing the calorie content on food labels, that feels fine for me now. And so I love that you said that, like, whenever you're thinking about making a change in your life, I want you to close your eyes and seeing how that feels. If you think about cutting out carbs and right away, that makes that sense of urgency and scarcity, like alarm in your head go off of, oh my God, now I can't eat this and I can't eat that. And you start feeling deprived. Then if you're feeling that in your body now, imagine what that's going to look like 2 weeks from now.
Exactly. And how it's going to impact your physical self when really these thoughts, again, are all alarms to keep us alive. Our body's just trying to keep us alive and safe. And so if your body's sending you alarms, please don't do something. Again, our nervous system's going to learn when I ask Michelle for help, Michelle's not going to help me. And then that becomes a very dangerous place to be in when we lose that trust with self, which I know in every binge eating person, there's a severance of that self-trust for sure.
Yeah. And I can use the example. My brother is a firefighter and he really enjoys intermittent fasting. And this is a conversation that we get into all the time because he keeps trying to convince me that intermittent fasting is like something that is universal and that he tries to bring out all of this research and this data. And I always explain to him, I am fully aware of the research. I'm fully aware that it does have health benefits, but I'm also fully aware that someone who has a history of disordered eating, or when I think if someone were to tell me that I can't eat until noon, there's like panic that builds up inside me because as of 8 a.m., I need food. And so there is such, like, when it comes to the nutrition and fitness world, like there is such a black and white type of thinking that, okay, maybe that worked for someone else. So that means it necessarily will work for me. And we disregard what our body's telling us.
Yeah, I'm gonna also play with you on the nutrition science of that. If you ever want, you can just say, you know, bro, you got to listen to this 5 minutes for me, by the way. Intermittent fasting is a great tool for everyone who's not remotely dysregulated. So if you are optimally healthy and a man, by the way, If you're optimally healthy and a man, intermittent fasting might work for you. For everyone else, intermittent fasting is a type of stressor. It's an hormetic stress. So it's a good stress, as we like to say. But if your overall stress load is too high, it actually just adds stress onto your plate. So it actually just becomes dangerous then. And what happens when we have too much stress in any category is we start having dangerous health outcomes. Women's bodies particularly are very protective, and we're very prone to cortisol spikes. And one problem with intermittent fasting is that it does increase cortisol, our main stress hormone. In women specifically of menstruating age, I have never seen intermittent fasting work. Never seen it work. I've seen it work 2 days a week, maybe. When women do it consistently, I'll run hormone tests or whatever it is, and I will watch their hormones get drastically altered within weeks if they do it every single day. So I would just say that not only are all of our bodies very different, but intermittent fasting specifically, women won't get those benefits there's exceptions to everything, but a majority of menstruating women in that age, right, from the first menstruation until menopause, will actually get more health issues because of the cortisol issues that then have a downstream effect. Then they'll get benefits. And also the anxiety I see with women with intermittent fasting is extreme because of that cortisol issue.
100%. And so I would love to know what you would say. So this is something that I get often. And I've actually had someone who's been messaging me on Instagram, and she was saying, I was seeing an intuitive eating counselor, and what she was saying is she was recommending eating breakfast, and I hate that idea. So there's a lot of people who have been chronically dieting, and they've probably tried intermittent fasting. And because of that fact is they've lost their hunger cues in the morning. And so they will come to me and say, I am not a morning person. I'm not a breakfast person. I don't get hungry until noon. What would you say to those people?
So first of all, let's evaluate that there are individual circumstances where some people just are not breakfast eaters. And that is actually true. Many of the people we're talking about are probably, or maybe not in that category. I can't say probably, maybe not in that category. So we're talking about someone who grew up eating breakfast and was a breakfast eater and has now become not a breakfast eater. So let's make that distinction. First of all, not only does not eating consistently mess with your hunger cues or your ability to recognize them, it also can mess with your digestion. So what I see a lot of times in binge eaters specifically is that if you end up kind of stacking your calories later in the day, or your food, and I don't really care about calories, your food intake, whatever, at the end of the day, what ends up happening is your digestion isn't ready for food in the morning. So if you start to kind of play with your calories or your food or whatever earlier in the day, that actually can lead to more hunger in the morning because you won't have as much sitting on you at night. The other thing is, I would say, is explore all areas of your digestion when it comes to not feeling that morning hunger. And this is where that functional nutrition piece comes in, because a sign of no morning hunger can also be a bit of a reflux or acid issue. And that's something to explore for people too. So there's a lot of reasons why we wouldn't feel hunger cues. It wouldn't only be because of past ignoring of them or binge eating or eating disorders. And from a physical plane, binge eating would actually lead you not only to have hunger cues that are altered from a mental standpoint, but from a physical standpoint too. But there are people who literally just are not literal breakfast eaters since they're kids. Like, it's just not their thing. Yeah. But that's kind of different person than we're talking about, I think, in most cases.
And I think that the conversation we're having really drives home the point that, like, nutrition and our health habits and our fitness habits, there's so many things that go into play, and your history and the root cause of what's going on. And what most people do is, like, the classic iceberg metaphor is they look at like the 5% of what they feel and what they think that they should do. And there's like 95% that's just going untouched and unseen.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. And that's definitely the case for hunger cues, which is kind of my, I'm a bit of being known for being the vocal minority in that I believe that we can approach weight loss at the same time we're healing a relationship with food, and that it's okay for people to want to lose weight, whereby many intuitive eating counselors, health at every size practitioners do not believe that at all, because I believe that what's right for the person is right for the individual. So I will definitely say that with all of that, it can be really complicated because the physical side of things can be very altered by the mental side of things, and the mental to the physical. So it is a delicate and intricate and important process to understand and how to interpret those messages your body's giving you too.
Yeah. And I'm sure that when you work with your clients, you also assess, like, are you ready to start trying to lose weight? Like, are you ready? Like, where do you need to place your focus? Because again, like, you can absolutely be okay with wanting to heal your relationship with food and striving for weight loss, but some people probably are not. If you look at where they're at, the way that they relate to food, the way that they relate to their bodies, maybe they will get to that point, but there are some steps that you need to take in order to get them ready to keep moving forward.
You're 100% right. And the way that I kind of know that is the level of urgency with which my clients are kind of coming to me with those goals. Like, if it feels really urgent, we're going to explore the urgency as opposed to reacting with urgency. And I always give this example. If you went to a doctor and you were like, oh my God, something's going on with my stomach, and the doctor responded and said, oh my God, I can't believe something's going on with your stomach, you would not feel like super soothed and super like hopeful that anything is going to be better. It's the same thing with a dietitian or a nutritionist like yourself. If someone's coming to you and is like, Sabrina, I need to lose weight, you're not going to be like, we got to get this weight off of you. That's not the same. To me, the urgency just isn't a call for me to be more curious about what's going on with them. But oftentimes I'm not even talking about food for several months with my clients. And I work with people who are pretty chronically ill, and have a lot of medical stuff going on top of it. And I'm really like their nutrition and lifestyle coach within that. So oftentimes we have to focus on the priority of what's going on the physical self, honestly, before we focus on the big food stuff. And because it's so sensitive and so important, that we don't increase urgency by making those changes too. Yes.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that it's also important to look at, are the changes that you're making in your life intrinsically motivated or extrinsically motivated? Because if you're starting to change the way that you eat or exercise or sleep or stress, and it's all directly related to if you see that number on the scale go down, and there's none of that intrinsic motivation that's been in place, then I don't want us to stop working together. And then a month from now, all of the changes that you've put into place are just going to fall down because you're no longer seeing weight loss changes.
Yeah. And I think that also, again, if you're driving the ship from that place of fear, you're going to drive the ship into like a wall, basically. So I think it's really, I don't know what walls are in the ocean, but a seawall, you're going to drive the ship into the seawall. But I think that that's the importance of what we talked about before with the intention piece of it too. Again, where the source of motivation is. I love that. And what the feeling of motivation is too. Again, we just don't do well when we're operating from a place of fear. We end up tripping up and going in the wrong direction normally.
Yeah. So I know that you posted something about this, about how to approach functional nutrition with body neutrality. So for someone, and maybe it would be helpful to even describe what body neutrality means.
Totally. Yeah. So I think of body positivity as being kind of this huge umbrella term that encompasses all about how to love our bodies, to love our actions, to be kind to ourselves. I think of body neutrality as this idea of we don't have to love ourselves, but we have to respect ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so this is just us showing our bodies respect. And for a lot of people, that feels more neutral and not as intimidating as body positivity is. Now, I would say the real definition of body positivity would also include this respect deeply, and that all of us at every single body size deserve respect, of course. I have to giggle because it's funny that we have to argue about this with people, right? Like, yeah, that's really silly that we ever have to say that. But I think body neutrality becomes where body positivity is very contentious for people on an internal plane, just because of what we've learned in diet culture about how different bodies do not deserve respect. Body neutrality seems like a lower entry point for people. And just this idea that we can listen to ourselves and respect ourselves, basically. And then what I kind of see in the nutrition world, and especially the dietitian world, as kind of a dichotomy and an issue right now, is there's conventional nutritionists, functional nutritionists, and these body positive practitioners. And all of them have completely different recommendations, essentially. I think that the best combination would be a world in which is how I practice, where functional nutrition and body positivity, body neutrality and positivity can meet, so that we can listen to the needs of our clients and act with priority appropriately to what they need at the time. And what I mean by that is, if someone has a parasite, for instance, and they need to go on a parasite cleanse, intuitive eating will not eradicate the parasite. So that's not a priority if they're sick every night from a parasite, right? So the beauty of functional nutrition is that we have this amazing science that we can apply and then incorporate the principles of intuitive eating when appropriate for the client. So not dismissing their physical needs and not dismissing their emotional needs either.
Yeah. And that's another thing is self-acceptance and self-improvement are not mutually exclusive. And I was talking to one of my clients today, and she is having a hard time with accepting the body that she's in now. And this is the body that she has been maintaining consistently for the past year. And she said, you know, I'm aware that this is my weight. This is the weight that my body is supposed to sit at. And yet I have a really hard time accepting it. And when we started diving into it, one of the things that kind of comes up in that little voice in her head is, I almost feel like I'm not, based on society's standards, I'm not allowed to love my body where it's at now. And I said, let's just start shifting away from having to feel the need to love your body and just giving yourself permission to accept where it's at now.
Just to exist in that body, right? Like just, it's okay. And I think what that client's expressing and you're hearing is also, it's very threatening and extremely scary to exist in society in a larger body. There are real consequences. And that's why it's so hard. Again, I'm like a huge proponent of the body positivity movement, and there's just some people who've taken it to a point where I don't think the original message is being met, honestly. And where that point is you can't want to lose weight because it's dangerous for your mental health. And that, for me, I feel like is degrading to people who are occupying larger bodies, who it's impairing their ability to get a job. It's impairing their ability to get medical care. I mean, these are real. If we could change society first, I would love to do that. But as it stands, we need to acknowledge, and you're already doing this beautifully, that people are feeling not safe inside of their bodies. And there's a real reason. They're not gaslighting themselves to not feel safe. There's real reasons why they don't feel safe. And I occupied a larger body much of my childhood into adulthood until I was about 18, 19. And during that time, people treated me completely differently. And since being quote unquote like normal sized, you know, the world opens up opportunities for you, especially as a healthcare professional. And I think that we can acknowledge that there's a feeling of unsafety and at the same time hold that space. And I think you're doing that really beautifully too. So I just want to commend you on that, but it's real. Like it's not, you know, telling people, oh, you don't have to lose weight. You're perfect. That's not real for people. Compared to what their lives are.
And it's hard coming from, like you said, from a straight body. It's hard coming from someone who has not, and I always make sure that I clarify, I know that I have thin privilege. I know that I have not experienced the judgment and the weight stigma from our society, but it's also important coming from, you know, like I said a couple of times, I work with chronic dieters. Let's look at your past experiences when you've gone after intentional weight loss, and has that actually led you to maintain a smaller weight? So totally. If we can look at your past experiences and if we can gather some of that evidence and that has not proven to work, then let's try something different. And actually, when you can take your focus away from weight loss and you can start tuning internally, and let's look at changing your motivations like we talked about, and look at how can we change our lifestyle. Again, we can start self-improvement and self-acceptance at the same time. If your body is meant to release that weight, then this is the best way to do it.
I agree. I think that it's even as much as from what I said, even as much as we're acknowledging this issue, again, we can't respond with the same urgency for which society has for us. We have to live inside of these bodies that we are in. And they are like these amazing things that like keep us alive, and the most intricate, insane, like the more I learn about the biology of the body and the chemistry, which I'm still learning always, I'm like, why are you so amazing? Like it's sick, like what our bodies can do. And it's so, when we can appreciate those parts of it and still appreciate the very reality that we live in, I think that's where we can create a little bit more calm and a little bit more safety inside. And it always comes back to safety, honestly, Sabrina. It's just that people are not feeling safe. And then if you're giving them an option to feel safe, that's great. Pursuing weight loss intentionally is a very unsafe kind of act. Your body is preparing for starvation. The second that we start having those thoughts, not the second we start starving ourselves, the second we start having the thoughts about it. So for sure, I feel like intentional weight loss pursual is like not good for most people. It's not very effective for most people. And it certainly can have a consequence of psychological issues. Absolutely.
And I just want to stress what you just said, which is super important. It's not the actual act of starving yourself that feels unsafe. It's the thoughts. And so if anyone has experienced this, and I'm sure that you have, is when you're thinking about going on the diet, you're thinking about starting again on Monday, the reason why you binged on the weekend or the reason why you binged the week before you started that diet, again, let's stop putting the blame on you and remember that your body is so smart. And right now, it feels unsafe. And so every time those thoughts about restriction pop up for you, you're driven to food because your body doesn't want that. It's going to start fighting against it. And that's what's so important that people don't understand about intuitive eating is when you allow yourself to have those foods, that doesn't mean you have to have those foods. Is that the permission is there and you feel more safe because you know that those foods are always around.
Absolutely. And I think that, again, just giving yourself that space of permission can be really powerful for people. And then that's when you can start accessing your authentic self because you're not working from a place of fear and make those food decisions, which I am a believer that we can make intentional food decisions in addition to intuitive food decisions. And intuitive eating is really a practice of intentional eating. It's not what, as you know, it's not this like everyone thinks this spiritual, oh, you just eat Oreos because you feel like it's of course not that. That's an oversimplified and absolutely incorrect characterization of what it is. But I do believe that within the model of intuitive eating, we can do things more intentionally, but pursuing weight loss directly does not seem to be super effective for people in the long term. In the short term, it could be, but what's the risk and what's the cost is always the question we have to ask.
Yeah. And as someone who has been through that scarcity mindset, who has been through the dieting, and now I have what I would think is a very positive and healthy relationship with food, knowing that I have all of these foods around, I make intentional decisions because I want to feel good. And I am able, and I would eat what most people say is quote unquote healthier than the general population. And it's because I don't have this sense of fear. I'm coming from a place of intention of what do I want to eat that's going to serve me? And when you're dieting, like that desire for health kind of goes out the window because again, you feel that rush, you feel that urgency. And so you can't prioritize those things that your inner self actually wants to prioritize.
Yeah. For us to get to that real voice, we need to like sort through the other voices, accept them, whatever they are. But when there's a lot of high level rumination and battling that's going on, we're going to just get decision fatigued. And I think what's interesting about dieting for some people is that they do feel really better when they start dieting because at least it took the decision fatigue away. But what it's also taking away is your autonomous power to make decisions, unfortunately. So I understand why people like following diets because it actually makes it so much less stressful on the brain perspective. But again, how's it hurting you on the back end? It's taking away your power.
Yeah. And that's why it's important to like work, if you can, like work with someone who's going to help you reconnect to that internal voice. Because when you actually get through that process, then the decision fatigue isn't there anymore because the same way that like you don't have to think all day long about when you should pee or when you should sleep or how you should move, like it really does happen intuitively for you. When you reconnect to that voice, it's not hard to listen to it. It just happens naturally.
Yeah, you almost do intuitive eating to like subconsciously create intuition, like access intuition. So it's like you do the things so that you don't have to do the things almost. Yeah. And I always know when someone's healing, when they stop, I have a lot of clients who have chronic gut issues and they'll come and then one day they'll just be like, oh, I've been having this nagging thought about carbs. I'm like, what's going on with your 15 time a day diarrhea? Like, you still having that? And they're like, oh no, I totally forgot about that. I'm like, it's always actually the absence of the busyness that we notice that and the pressing thoughts that is when the real healing occurs. It's like, I always tell my clients, I'm like, you literally 3 months ago, if I would have told you would have forgotten to talk about your digestion, you would have never believed me. And that's the same thing with dieting. It's like you intentionally focus on it, so on the thoughts and the relationship with food so that you can ultimately forget that you were focusing on it in the first place.
Yeah. Oh, I could talk to you forever, Michelle. But I'm trying to put myself like, this was such a good conversation and I want to give like the listeners some actionable steps. So let me put in the shoes of the typical person who listens to the podcast, which is the person who is emotionally and physically dysregulated, constantly living in fear, constantly, like you said, that external voice, that internal voice that are always battling with one another. And they have been making some of those mistakes that we talked about. And they're like, okay, I have learned that I'm approaching this all wrong, but I would like to know what to do to start going in the right direction. Like, where would you tell these people to start? I know this is a hard question.
No, I think it's an amazing question. I've had a ball talking to you too, Sabrina. You're amazing. I mean that. I would say the first place to do is check in. So take inventory, take tally, notice, observe. That's the first place I would check. I would say, and don't check in only from a mental place, because that can be very overwhelming if people are experiencing any sort of trauma. Check in from the physical place. When I start dieting, right before a binge, what's going on in my body? What's happening? Oh, my stomach's tightening. My shoulders are tightening. I feel rapid heartbeat. I have a headache. Check in with your body. Just notice. That's all you would have to do. You can do something called a food and mood journal too.
I have that in my program.
Of course you do. I'm not surprised. Where you can just use Sabrina's amazing tool then of keeping kind of track of your food and mood. And then I would add a third column and just say bodily sensations. Bringing it back to our body and reintegrating that body and mind connection is essential. And I think that's one thing that's missing in a lot of kind of eating disorder therapists' offices and practitioners' offices is bringing it back to the somatic, which means of the body experience of just everything.
Yeah. Yeah. And I always ask my clients, like, okay, before a binge, can you tell me how you felt? Like, was your heart beating really quickly? Did you feel that sense of urgency? Like, you just needed to get your hands busy? Like, that is your body telling you something. So even just as simple as like, okay, before you feel that urge to binge, or when you have that automatic response, just take a deep breath. Right? Slow down and just bring yourself back to your body. And even just putting your hand on your heart and saying like, you're safe, or like having those voices in your head, like this food is always going to be around. Like, this is something that is so important when it comes to binging is whatever food you tend to think is like your binge food or your like out of control food. A simple thing you can start doing is reminding yourself as you're having this food that you're not starting again tomorrow, that this food is always going to be around. And if you're hungry an hour from now or tomorrow morning, you want to have those cookies, that is available to you. Chances are you're not going to want to, but when you have that permission and it's available to you, you don't feel that need to have it all in one sitting.
Absolutely agree with you. Yeah. I think that I guess the first one will be check in. The second one is give yourself whatever tools you need to feel safe and regulate your nervous system for sure. I think that would be really important. And then I love this idea of giving yourself permission, not only to have those foods, permission to binge, permission to feel, stop taking away your own power and give yourself back your power, and pretty amazing things happen.
Oh, Michelle, I love you so much. So for anyone who wants to connect with you, I know that you mentioned that you work with people who have some pretty serious medical conditions, but anyone who wants to connect with you, talk to you, how can they reach you?
Yeah, the easiest way is also through my podcast, which is called Quiet the Diet, which the goal of Quiet the Diet is super similar to your mission, Sabrina, which is to help people kind of access that intuitive voice. And when we're learning things from a nutritional trend perspective, even a functional nutrition perspective, how do we know what information to take in, what information to push away, and how to ultimately learn what's right for our bodies? So we have a variety of different functional health professionals to help us do that, in addition to therapists for the mindset piece of it and everything. And then I have my own practice where I work with, again, clients for the conditions named. I also have a staff dietitian who works with people on the same conditions I do, but she has a bigger opportunity and wider caseload ready to take people. So very excited about that. And you can catch me. I'll give you the information in the show notes for my Instagram, on Instagram ranting in very long form. And I'm happy to connect any of those places.
Yeah. And you have an amazing Instagram for anyone who wants to follow you. We will put that in the show notes as well. Thank you so much, Michelle. You were amazing. And I'm sure that anyone who listened to this conversation is going to want to listen to this episode a couple of times. And thank you so much to you listeners for listening. And we will see you on the next episode. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. If you feel like you want some support to learn how to stop binge eating and have a positive, healthy relationship with food and get back in your body, reconnect to your body and what it needs, insights, then I would love to invite you to the 7-day free intuitive eating challenge that will be starting a couple of days from now. So if you want to learn more, head to the link in the show notes, sabrinamagnan.com/challenge, where you'll be able to sign up and start getting all those details so that you can get the support and community that you need to start your intuitive eating journey. See you on the inside. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you found it valuable, I would love if you would share it with someone you know that could benefit. If you're loving the show, don't forget to subscribe over on Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. I really love hearing feedback from you, so please leave a rating and review over on Apple to help us get in the ears of more people who need it the most. Finally, come hang out with me on Instagram at Sabrina Magnan Health for more educational content and get up close and personal with me. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode.